I just wanted to peek in via my webcam, so hopefully you could see me and introduce myself. My name is Ryan Gottfredson. I am a leadership professor at Cal State Fullerton, where I teach and do research on leadership. I'm also a leadership development consultant, where I help organizations develop their leaders and improve their cultures, primarily through a focus on mindsets. You'll get a sense of why I focus on mindsets as I go along. And I also happen to be the Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author of a book that I'll hold up here called Success Mindsets. This was launched about 4 months ago, and I guess 5 months ago now. And it's been a fun ride to see it get out into the world, and fortunate to have people emailing me weekly about how the book is having a positive influence on their life. So I would hopefully, if you're interested in the book, I hope that it will have a similar benefit to you. If nonetheless, I hope the material that I cover will have a similar benefit to you. All right, so I'm going to pull back my screens back up, or my slides back up, and then I'll just kind of get underway. If you have any questions as I go along, don't hesitate to let me know, and I would be happy to either interject or try to address your questions. So let me jump into this here and ask you a little bit about why you are here. So let me give you some options here. So type in, are you here because you have to be here? Are you here to gain social connections or develop a network? Or would you say you're here to develop yourself and to enhance your success, or maybe for some other reason? So in the chat box, maybe just chat in A, B, C, or D, or maybe even the combination of them. All right. So, which is good. Melinda, you're saying you have to be here, right? Because you do, but hopefully also you take something away from this. So the way that I want to frame this up as is considering our ideal self. And I can ask you, and if we were in person, I'd have you answer, is, are you already your ideal self? And I would venture to guess that the answer to this question is no. And there's always ways in which we can improve and ways in which we can become more of our ideal self. Well, why is it important to seek to become more of our ideal self? Well, to answer this question, let me kind of get you thinking with another question. Do you ever operate at a level below your ideal self? And of course, we do this at times. And how does this make us feel? And I'm a parent of an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I'm not sure if there's anything that will help you develop greater self-awareness if you allow it to than being a parent. And there are times in my parenting where I sit back and I recognize that I didn't handle that situation as well as I could have. And there's always this pang that it makes me feel that I just lived less than my best. And my guess is we've kind of all experienced this. And I feel like the material that I'm going to cover with you today has done more for helping me become the best version of myself than anything else that I have ever learned. And I think part of that is because we're going to get at the foundation of who we are. And I think that's the best place for us to focus if we want to become more of our ideal selves. So my goal for you is for you to walk out of here more like your ideal self. But if that's going to happen, what needs to occur? Well, there's a few things, and maybe let me get your thoughts. If you're going to walk out of here more like your ideal self, which of these options needs to occur? So I've got 3 options here, A, B, or C. Why don't you chat that into the chat box with your thoughts? So A would be have some of your core ideas supported. B would be to learn something new. And C would be to see ourselves or our world differently. Right? And there's no right or wrong answer here, but let me just have you reflect on the workshops that you've sat in on. My guess is that the ones that have been the most impactful for you have probably done a combination of all three of these things. And in fact, the ones that have the greatest impact on you probably are the ones that do see, that cause you to see yourself or your world differently. Let me give you an example of this. So I used to, and I'm not proud of this, this is my less than ideal self. When I would pull up on a street corner, I'm in Southern California. California has half of the US's homeless population. So what that means to me is when I go driving around, it's likely that I'm going to come up on a street corner where there's somebody asking for some form of assistance. A homeless person usually, or at least that's the way that we categorize them. And for most of my adult life, I saw them as not doing their best. And when I would see them not doing their best, and I would see them asking for money or other form of assistance, I would be quick to be critical of them. I would, why are you asking me for my hard-earned money when you're just standing here? Maybe why don't you do something more productive, like go get a job, right? Well, is that type of an attitude aligned with my ideal self? Of course not. That's not who I want to be, but that's who I have been. And I was invited after I heard Brene Brown speak, where she invited us to see others as doing the best that they can. And so the next time I pulled up to this intersection, I saw a homeless person. I challenged myself to try to see them as doing the best that they can. And this led me to ask a question, which was, what in the world has happened in their life that has led them to believe that this is the best way to live? And immediately upon asking that question, I tried to put myself in their shoes, and I grew quickly empathetic. What have you been through that has led you to believe that asking for money on the street corner, living on the streets, is the best way to live? And I was much more empathetic. So when I would see them as not doing their best, I was quite critical of them, and I was behaving in a way that wasn't aligned with my ideal self. But when I saw them as doing their best, I was much more empathetic, and I was much more inclined to operate in a way that was aligned with my ideal self. And to me, this has been a game changer. This was a life-changing lesson that I learned because it caused me to see myself and my world differently. And because of that, I was a different person. So I'm not saying anything against A and B, but that seed level, if we can get there, it's a life-changing experience. And I guess I'm audacious in saying that I hope that this workshop is that for you. Let me have you fill in the blank here as we kind of move into the topic. What % of our thinking, feeling, judging, and acting is driven by our non-conscious automatic processes? So let me have you chat in what you think the answer here is. All right, we've got one person saying 80%, another saying 60%, right? And what the experts suggest is that 90% of our thinking, feeling, judging, and acting is driven by our non-conscious automatic processes, which then makes this image on the screen make a lot of sense. That effectively what this means is we operate on autopilot. I mean, not that we are not conscious. It's just such as, let me give you an example. What if somebody gives you constructive criticism? Do you have a typical way in which you respond to that or react to that? Some of us may immediately get defensive. Others of us may sit back and say, what can I learn from this? Right? And we are going to have generally you're going to have an immediate reaction to that constructive criticism, which is our non-conscious automatic processing in the works. So let me give you some other examples. And I want you to think for yourself, what are your first thoughts? What are your thoughts when you hit a challenge? How do you see challenges? Do you see it as something to avoid? Or do you see it as an opportunity to learn and grow? What about different ideas? Somebody disagrees with you. Maybe even think about it if it's a subordinate or a child. How do you react to this? Do you see it as a threat and get defensive, or do you see it as being necessary for personal improvement? What about risk? Do you see risk as something to avoid, or do you see risk as being required for accomplishing goals? And I've already gone through this example here. Is how do you see a homeless person? Do you see a homeless person as not doing their best, or do you see them as doing their best? You see, in each of these instances, we've got more of a negative perspective and a positive perspective. And when we take on this negative perspective, such as me seeing that homeless person is not doing their best, that leaves me with a certain set of options that see in terms of how I could respond to that situation based upon how I read that situation. And of those options, such as option 5, 6, and 7, I'm probably going to choose the option that I see as being best, which would be option number 5. But what I don't realize, because I've got a narrow and more negative perspective, is I don't realize that there's 4 other options up above it that are actually better. I'm just not able to see it because I don't have the right perspective. I'm seeing others as not doing their best. So when we take on the more positive perspective, a whole other range of options and much more productive options open up to us. So here I brought these 4 different situations together, and those are on the left side column. And then we've got 2 different people, person A and person B, who respond to these differently. And who is going to be more successful? I mean, even put in the chat box. Is it going to be person A or person B? Person is going to be more successful. Are they the ones that avoid challenges, see disagreements as a threat, risk is something to avoid, see others as not doing their best? Right? Or is it going to be somebody who sees challenges as an opportunity to learn and grow, see disagreement as necessary for personal improvement, risk is required for accomplishing goals, and others as doing their best, right? Person B, it's a slam dunk person B. But I guess I'll cue you into this, is I have got a personal assessment that I have individuals take, I'll introduce that later, that assesses how we are likely to respond to each of these different 4 situations. And in this assessment, what I found is that only 5% of people will consistently operate like person B across all 4 of these areas. That means that most of us have probably got some shifts to do when it comes to our perspective. Yeah, here's what I mean. And I think this framework will be helpful to you. Is I think all of us are seeking success. So I kind of put that at the top of this pyramid of success. Well, what's the immediate driver of our success? I mean, if we want to improve our success, where do most people think about? Well, they think about what they do, right? It's our behaviors. It's the things that we do that drive our success. And so when most people want to improve their success, they say, what do I need to do differently? And that's not bad, but it's short-sighted, because what lies below behavior? What drives our behavior? It's our thinking. How we think drives how we behave, and our behavior drives our success, right? So when I would think about a homeless person as, or I would think critically about a homeless person, I would behave in one way. If I would think about them empathetically, I would behave in a different way, and I would succeed to a different degree, right? So this is great if we can get to the thinking level, but there's a layer that resides under that. So what is the driver of our thinking? Well, that's how we see and interpret our world. Do we see them as doing the best that they can, or as not doing the best that they can, right? So if we want to become more of our ideal self, if we want to reach greater levels of success, which level would be best to focus on? Behavior, the thinking, or the seeing and interpreting? And I hope that you're thinking that we need to get to the root, right? If we can get to the root of the issues, we're going to be more effective. And that's surely the case. But here's the problem. Remember, 90% of our thinking, feeling, judging, and acting is driven by our non-conscious automatic processing. Where does that non-conscious automatic processing reside? At that seeing and interpreting level. So we're generally not conscious to the impact that how we see the world has on our thinking, our behaving, and our success. But if we can awaken to how we typically see and interpret our world, we can empower ourselves to change, to see the world differently, and therefore think and behave differently. So I think most people, when they're trying to improve their success, they're pulling forward the top levels of this pyramid, and they're overlooking this bottom level. And when we overlook this bottom level and we don't change it and that stays the same, that will continually resist the changes that we are trying to make to our thinking, to our behavior, and to our success. A much more natural way of going about developing ourselves and improving our success is to start at the bottom level, to push that forward. As we do so, as we improve how we see and interpret our world, our thinking will naturally improve, our behavior will naturally improve, and so will our success. So this leads us then to the question, what causes us to see the same exact thing, but maybe interpret it very differently than somebody else? Well, this factor, this level at the bottom of the pyramid, is our mindsets. One level in which we could describe our mindsets is our mindsets are the mental lenses that we wear that shape how we view the world. They serve as our mental fuel filters, right? Our brain takes in way more information than we can process. And so we rely upon our mindsets to filter in select information. We interpret that information in unique ways based upon the information that is filtered in and how it's interpreted. That then activates different types of thinking, learning, and behavior in order to navigate that situation effectively. Let me give you an example that brings this to life. This example is a research study in which individuals took a mindset assessment. The researchers then identified those that were in group 1 who scored low on the mindset assessment, and those that scored high on the mindset assessment, which were put into group 2. But they were all given the same task, which was 8 easy questions and then 4 difficult questions. What the researchers were trying to assess is, would these individuals respond differently to failure, depending upon their mindsets? And sure enough, they found that that's the case. So those who scored low on the mindset assessment, they were rather pleased with themselves as they got through the 8 easy questions. But as soon as they hit those hard questions, they became depressed. Their thoughts quickly denigrated. They started to beat themselves up mentally. And even they gave up. They stopped applying themselves. They just started guessing at the answers. But those in group 2, they operated very differently. When they hit the hard questions, they started to encourage themselves. They dug in more vigorously, and they remained confident and optimistic. I mean, the way these two groups are operating is as if they are from completely different planets. But the only thing different is their mindsets. And I'll tell you about the specific mindset that is here in just a little bit. But the thing that's interesting to me about this is if we were to go back and interview these individuals in these different groups and ask them, did you respond to this situation the best way that you could? I think that both groups would have said yes. Is there a better way to navigate this situation? It's only when we look at this from an outside perspective that it becomes very easy to see that it's those in group 2 that navigate the situation much more effectively. In other words, to those in group 1, they were doing the best that they could, the best that their mindsets allowed them to do. So hopefully this helps you see the power of mindsets, but I also hope it leads you to ask a question. And that question is, okay, if mindsets are so powerful, what mindsets do I need to have to be effective and to be successful? So get into this. I have done a lot of research. I opened up the floodgates in terms of looking into the various different academic literatures to identify where has mindsets been studied and what mindsets have they identified as being important. And what I found is that there's 4 different sets of mindsets that are studied across different disciplines, across psychology, education, management, and marketing. And what I found is that even across these disciplines, and even though they're studied in their own kind of isolated pockets, they're all identifying mindsets that exist on a continuum that range from negative to positive in terms of the effects that they have. So I've brought these together into one framework, and here they are. There's fixed and growth, closed and open, prevention and promotion, and inward and outward. So what I want to do next is I just want to walk you through each of these because we're putting labels to them, and I want to help you understand, get a sense of understanding of what these labels represent. So let me dive into these. Again, if you have any questions as I go along, don't hesitate to chat those in. But I'm just going to kind of plug through here. So let me start with fixed and growth mindset. So when we have a fixed mindset, we see ourselves and others as being unable to change our talents, abilities, and intelligence. When we have a growth mindset, we see ourselves and others as being able to change our talents, abilities, and intelligence. And roughly about 50% of the population has more of a fixed mindset. The other half has more of the growth mindset. Here's why this matters, is if we believe that we cannot change our talents, abilities, and intelligence, and we fail at something, how are we left to interpret that? Well, if we've failed and we can't improve, we're left to interpret that as though we are a failure. We're left to internalize that. So those with a fixed mindset don't want to fail, right? In fact, they see the world in terms of haves and have-nots. If I fail, that means I'm a have-not. I can never become a have in that area. But those with the growth mindset, they don't see the world in that way, right? So if they fail, yeah, that may mean they're a have-not now. But because they believe they could change their talents, abilities, intelligence, that doesn't preclude them from being a have in the future. So here's what the research says on some of the main differences between those with a fixed mindset and those with a growth mindset. Those with a fixed mindset, because they want to avoid failure, they're primarily focused on looking good. They want to validate themselves. They avoid challenges because challenges are ripe for failure. They believe that success should come naturally. So if they try something new and it doesn't come naturally, then they're like, oh, this isn't for me, I'm giving up. Like this was me with a fixed mindset my freshman year of college. I wanted to become a medical doctor. And so I signed up for the Weeder pre-med chemistry class, upon which I got the lowest grade I'd ever received, a C. To me, this was a failing grade. And because I had a fixed mindset, I changed my major, right? I gave up. This didn't come naturally. It's not for me. I better change my major. What I didn't realize is that I would have been much more successful if I would have had a growth mindset, which I would have seen this failing grade as an opportunity to learn and grow, right? Maybe I would have seen it as an opportunity or as an indication that becoming a doctor is going to be harder than I anticipated. And maybe my study habits aren't up to par, and that maybe I need to spend more time and effort learning chemistry, right? My fixed mindset didn't even let me get there. So those with the growth mindset, they're much more inclined to embrace challenges and persist beyond failure. They believe that success takes effort. So when they hit a challenge or when they fail, that's no indication that they're heading in the wrong direction. So who's going to be more primed for current and future success? And that should be pretty clear. So research for over 30 years on fixed growth mindsets led experts to say cultivating a growth mindset could be the single most important thing you ever do to help you achieve success. The next set of mindsets is the difference between a closed and an open mindset. When we have a closed mindset, we're closed to the ideas and suggestions of others. When we have an open mindset, we're open to others' ideas and suggestions, and we're willing to give them adequate time and thought. So let me ask you this question. You don't have to answer, but are you open or closed? Well, before you smugly slap an open-minded sticker on your forehead, consider this. Closed-minded people would never consider that they could actually be closed-minded. In fact, their perceived open-mindedness is what's so dangerous, right? This leads me to ask the question, what would lead somebody to be closed-minded? What would lead somebody to close to the ideas and suggestions of others? Well, at a fundamental level, what we probably believe is that what I know is best. In other words, our mind is a bucket. We see our bucket as being full. What happens if we pour something into a full bucket? Nothing gets absorbed, right? It just runs off the side. So that makes us close to the ideas and suggestions of others when we believe that what we know is best. When we have an open mindset, we believe that we can be wrong. In other words, we may know a lot, like our bucket may be pretty full, but we're just leaving room for the idea that we could be wrong. And when we leave that room for the idea that we could be wrong, we're open to the ideas and suggestions of others. So here's how this plays out in terms of what the research has found. Is those with a closed mindset, they believe that what they know is best, so they are focused on being right and on having their ideas supported. Therefore, they want to be the one providing all the answers. And because they're not asking questions, they're out of touch. They avoid feedback, they avoid new perspectives, and they see disagreement as a threat. But those with an open mindset, because they believe that they could be wrong, they're not concerned about being right. Instead, they're focused on finding truth, thinking optimally. They're asking questions to figure out, can I see this better? Am I wrong? Thus, they seek to understand, they seek feedback, they invite new perspectives, and they see disagreement as an opportunity to learn. And who's going to be more effective and primed for current and future success? Right? It's pretty easy. We all know the people that have a closed mindset, they're generally unapproachable and off-putting. They fail to gain a more complete perspective, and their thinking and decision-making becomes of lower quality. It's only those with an open mindset that are able to think at a better level. And in fact, it has a greater benefit than that. An open mindset drives the number one factor that fuels high-performance teams. That factor is psychological safety, the belief that we could speak up and take risk without fear of negative repercussion. And that's only going to happen is if we feel like those around us have an open mindset. All right, so the next set here is that we've got prevention and a promotion mindset. So when we've got a prevention mindset, we're primarily focused on not losing. When we have a promotion mindset, we're focused on winning and gains. And to make this come to life for you, I want you to imagine that we're a ship captain in the middle of the ocean. And if we're a ship captain in the middle of the ocean with the prevention mindset, our number one focus is on not sinking. We don't want any problems to occur. We don't want to take any risks. We don't want to rock the boat. Well, if this is our focus, what happens when a storm comes on the horizon and comes towards us? Well, we're going to be inclined to run from that storm and go to a place of safety because that storm represents something that might sink us. So our best course of action, justifiably, is to go to a place of safety. Well, is that place of safety, maybe that harbor or port, is that our original destination that we set out for? Unlikely, right? Those with the promotion mindset, on the other hand, they operate with a different focus. I mean, it's not that they're not concerned about sinking. Of course, they don't want to sink. But their number one focus is on a destination and making progress towards it. So when that storm comes on the horizon, they ask themselves, does that stand between me and where I want to go? And if the answer is yes, they don't run from it. They make the preparations necessary to take on the storm. They batten down the hatches. And they muster up the courage to work through the storm because that's the only way they will get to their destination. So what this means for us is at the end of the day, when we operate with a prevention mindset, we're generally doing what's making us feel comfortable and we're avoiding problems, that's justifiable. But we end up being blown about by the winds and the currents of the sea. We end up going the path of least resistance. It's only those with the promotion mindset that end up in a destination of their own proactive design. And again, we can ask ourselves, who's going to be more primed for current and future success? And that seems pretty clear. To introduce the last set of mindsets, I want you to recall some instances in which you're all guilty, so own up to it. Recall a time you failed to let someone merge into your lane, even though they had their blinker on. Recall a time you failed to give someone your full attention. Recall a time you failed to give someone support when you had the ability, or when you failed to do something kind for a family member or a friend when it would have been easy for you to do, such as doing the dishes. What about a time you gave a manager or subordinate fabricated excuse? What was your mindset in these situations? Right? Let's look at this first one. You didn't let somebody merge into your lane. Like, we've all been there. Like, it's not the end of the world that this happens, but it's kind of a jerk thing to do, right? Well, Why don't we let them into our lane? Because we generally think to ourselves, my position in this lane is more important for me than it is for you. And so when we don't let them into our lane, how do we justify it? Well, at least for me, is I don't say I didn't let that person in. What I do say is I didn't let that car in, right? So when we have an inward mindset, we see ourselves as more important than others. And when we see ourselves as more important than others, we have a tendency to see others as objects. When we have an outward mindset, we see others as being just as important as ourselves. And when we see others as being just as important as ourselves, we're able to see them as people and to value them as such. Like this is like Captain Hook, who with an inward mindset says, I'm the important one here. I don't need to paddle the boat because I've got an object behind me named Smee who's going to get me where I want to go. Well, that's very different than the outward mindset servant leadership approach, which is we're in this together. How do we succeed together? These are some of the research differences that we found, and we can ask ourselves, who's going to be more primed for current and future success? And that seems pretty clear. So these are the 4 sets of mindsets. And my guess is prior to coming into this, if I were to ask you the question, do you feel like mindsets are important? I don't think any of you would say no, right? We all know mindsets are important, but then what are mindsets? And I think a lot of people think about mindsets as being kind of this fluffy, ethereal concept, like, oh yeah, you have to have a positive mindset, almost like mindsets are an attitude. But the reality is that mindsets are something much deeper than that. In fact, and I described them earlier as mental lenses. They are literally neural connections in our brain that connect our 3 major brain regions, our reptilian, our mammalian, and our human brains. Our mindsets and the neural connections that interconnect these 3 major brain regions actually serve as the circuit board for our brain. That's why our mindsets are so foundational to everything that we do. And until now, you may not have known what mindsets are out there or even what mindsets you need to have. But I hope this framework helps you better understand that, because when we can put labels to these things, then we can introspect about them. And that's been my journey, as I used to be on the negative side for each of these sets of mindsets, partly just because I didn't know any better. And once I learned that there's better mindsets to have, I would say it was a fairly easy shift. And I'll tell you a little bit about how we shift our mindsets. We're going to ask ourselves, who's going to be more successful? Who's going to be more closer to their ideal self? Someone with fixed, closed, prevention, and inward mindsets, or someone with growth, open, promotion, and outward mindsets? The reality is that if we have more of these negative mindsets, is we've got some fears and insecurities that are causing us to want to self-protect, to want to look good, be right, avoid problems, and get ahead. But where we're going to be most effective is when we're focused on learning and growing, finding truth and thinking optimally, reaching goals, and lifting others. So if you want to awaken to the quality of your personal mindsets, I've developed a personal mindset assessment. Here's a couple of ways in which you can access it. So you can text my mindsets to 44222. Or you could just go to my website at ryangottfredson.com, and you'll get a comprehensive and individualized report of the quality of your mindsets relative to the 11,000 plus people who have taken my mindset assessment. So I brought this up just earlier, but look at these desires. Are these good or bad desires? The desire to look good, be right, avoid problems, and get ahead. My guess is that you would say that society would suggest that these are good desires. And these are very justifiable desires, right? Who wants to look bad, be wrong, have problems, and get passed up? Nobody. But when we have these desires, where is our focus? It's on ourselves. And these desires are what's associated with these negative mindsets. In other words, these desires are driven by our underlying negative mindsets. And when we have these mindsets and these negative desires, we are in self-protection mode. And we're going to be much more effective if we can operate more in organization advance mode, which means that we take on the mindsets of growth, open, promotion, outward mindsets, then drives us having a desire to learn and grow, find truth, reach goals, and lift others. So I hope this has been a good overview, and you may be asking the question, how do I go about shifting my mindsets? Well, I don't think that this is too different than learning how to count to 10 in a different language. Right? The first step in learning how to count to 10 in a different language is we've got to own the gaps. We got to recognize that I have a gap here, I don't know the language, and I want to know the language. And we've got to believe that it's possible to learn that language. So that's the first step. The second step is to learn the language of mindsets, which meaning if I want to learn how to count to 10 in a language, and I've got this up in English, but let's just say Spanish, we got to know that uno stands for one, dos stands for two. Right? We got to know that. But then when we know that, then we could go about practicing. Right? We need to spend 5 or 10 minutes a day learning and practicing counting to 10 in Spanish, let's say. The same thing goes for our mindsets, is we need to engage in regular practice and interventions, 5 or 10 minutes a day, that activate our positive mindset neural connections. This is a study that demonstrates the power of this, where they took a group of financial professionals, showed one group a 3-minute video about how stress is debilitating, another group a 3-minute video about how stress is enhancing, both designed to alter mindsets in the short term, and they tracked their engagement, performance, and blood pressure over the next 2 weeks. What they found is that those who watched this 3-minute video about how stress is enhancing, they had higher engagement, higher performance, and lower blood pressure. So if you want to engage in some regular practice and interventions, one idea is to pick up my book, Success Mindsets, and there's a whole host of ideas, as well as if you were to take my mindset assessment. Would be an example of something that you can do. And again, a resource for other examples. So I want to come back to where we started. My guess is that all of us in this room or listening in are not yet our ideal selves. And if we want to become more of our ideal selves, I think the most important thing that needs to happen is we need to see ourselves and our world differently. In other words, we probably need to shift our mindsets. So I hope this has helped you awaken to how you can become more of your ideal selves. Maybe even helped you identify, what mindset do I need to work on? Where are even my fears and insecurities that I need to address so that I could shift my mindsets and become more of my ideal self? So that is all I have for this. I'm happy to open this up to any questions that you may have. And of course, as I mentioned, I believe this is being recorded. If you want to reach out to me, if you're watching the recording, you can. I've got my email address there. You connect with me on places like LinkedIn is probably where I'm most active, but also others. All right, so I got a question here, and I'm looking at another monitor over here. Let me pull that back up. Where did it go? There we go. So the question is, what are your thoughts on depression and overcoming it via mindsets? So when we understand mindsets at a neurological level, that our brain is made up of millions of neural connections. There's only a small percentage of these that span across our 3 major brain regions. These are called cortical neural connections, more than you need to know. But effectively, again, we've got our reptilian, our mammalian, and our human brain. And our mindsets are these long-range neural connections that interconnect these 3 major brain regions. And when these mindsets and these neural connections are working well, and they are what psychologists call integrated, what that means is it allows for all 3 of these major brain regions to work effectively together. When people, and when we have the positive mindsets, what that generally means is that these long-range neural connections are integrated. When we have more of the negative mindsets, what this means is that these long-range neural connections are disintegrated, is at least what psychologists say. And what that means is that these three major brain regions working as effectively together as they could. Now, this isn't directly related to depression yet. I want to get to that. Because one of the things that I'm learning is an answer to the question, what causes people to take on negative mindsets? And among many answers, one of the main answers is trauma. And trauma can be big T trauma, it can be little t trauma. But when we experience trauma, then as a defense mechanism against the pain that we feel, our brain actually disintegrates ourselves as a way to cut off those negative feelings. And we generally will develop a fear or an insecurity around that trauma. Let me just give you somewhat of a playful but a real example. So my wife has a couple of mean older brothers that had her watch the movie It when she was like 2 or 3 years old. And to this day, my wife is deathly afraid of clowns, right? This was trauma for her. And, I might even say it's big T trauma because it's still having an effect on her. Well, what that means is that when she sees a clown, even a picture of a clown, because her brothers are still mean and they'll text message her pictures of clowns. So she'll pull up this text message of a picture of a clown, and her reptilian and her mammalian brain will operate on overdrive. They will cause a visceral reaction within her. She will start to sweat as a result of this. And what is going on here is because of the disintegration, her human brain is not able to step in effectively and essentially say, hey, this may be scary for you, but remember, it's just a text message. It can't actually hurt you. So now let's better regulate ourselves. So when we experience trauma and our brain is disintegrated, that's generally the effect that happens is we have this fear or insecurity. And when that gets triggered, we have a tendency to operate in a way that makes us feel good for us in the moment, but may be detrimental for us and others around us in the long run. And that's oftentimes what the research is finding around these negative mindsets. So when people take the get 8 easy questions right and then four difficult questions wrong, if they start to beat themselves up over this, they've got this fixed mindset is what they've got, is that probably relates to messaging that they received earlier in their life, that what really matters is not how much you learn and grow, but how you look. So if as a child we are complimented with, you were so smart, you were so beautiful, you were so funny with labels, that's going to incentivize more of a fixed mindset. When we're complimented by, oh, man, you performed really well. I can't believe how much effort you put in there, right? That's more of a growth mindset inducing compliment. And so when we even look at our school system, what does our schools incentivize? Looking good or learning and growing? Looking good, right? Our grades. So this is a very long-winded answer to get back to your thoughts on depression. Depression is related to disintegration. There are other factors also related to depression that exist outside of dysregulation. But I think that when psychiatrists are working with people who are depressed, anxious, have PTSD, or any sort of psychiatric disorder, generally their goal is to create integration. And a lot of times pharmaceutical drugs can help with creating that integration. It can help repair some negative loops that go on. But also research is also finding that pharmaceutical medications are one thing that can be helpful. They are not the only thing that is helpful, and they may not always be helpful. That there's other things that can help us better integrate our mind. And if you're interested in this topic more, I could not recommend this book more. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, and it is a game-changing book. Another book on depression is by Johan Hari, and it is Lost Connections. So if you want to dive into it further, those are a couple of really great resources. So thank you for that question. It's a great question. It's also a very deep question. So thank you for letting me go there. Any other questions? I haven't seen any come through. But happy to take any more, and also happy to connect with any folks offline. Yeah, you're welcome, Gary.